Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to our fourth installment of our Fight for Equality series. Today, we're very honored to have Mr. Jim Pichetti from the Chicago Coalition from the Homeless. He is one of the regional directors, I believe. And we're going to be talking to him a little bit about how he works with the organization and to help battle homelessness in our community.
Hi,
Thanks for
thank
having me.
you for coming. Yeah. So let's just get started. So can you tell us a little bit about the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless here in Naperville and the work that you're doing with the organization?
Would be happy to. So our organization is going to be celebrating its 40th anniversary this year. We were started back in 1980 as a group of folks who are actually working in direct services for both Heartland Alliance and for Travelers and Immigrant Aid. And we're very disappointed at the lack of any commitment for city funds to help impact homelessness and get folks off the street. And so this group of folks broke away from those social services and began an organization called the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless. Now, how I got to be working in Naperville is back in 2010. We were talking to a number of our community partners. We've had a homeless youth committee that is as old as the organization itself. And partners from different parts of the state had reached out to our executive director saying, hey, you guys do some great work in Chicago. You guys are really effective at mobilizing and organizing 200, 300, 400 folks to go down to Springfield to talk about a comprehensive list of demands and to fight for more funds and resources in the state budget. But in terms of doing things around the state back in 2010, there was a clamor, a call for a more unified front, a more unified message for communities and providers and folks experiencing homelessness all across the state. And so I actually moved from doing some work on minimum wage and living wage jobs in Chicago to become our state network community organizer, and started reaching out to anybody who was working on homeless services across the state. So churches, homeless shelters, transitional housing programs. And one of the places where I started was St. Thomas the Apostle Church. Ironically, it was where my family and I go to church in Naperville. We were living in Naperville at the time. We now live in Plainfield and still go there. It's a 45-minute drive each way. It's a little brutal, but it's worth it. We started talking about issues pertaining to homelessness and housing in Naperville. We got folks together who were doing social services and both residents of Naperville. We held an open meeting and it was standing room only. We had folks in this giant assembly hall that they call the Lighthouse. And if I remember right, all the chairs were filled. And we put this giant list of issues pertaining to homelessness and housing on a whiteboard, and started pursuing what we can do as a community to tackle homelessness and housing insecurity in Naperville. We've been at it now going on 6 years together.
Wow, that is incredible. And so we like to ask this question to a lot of our guests, kind of like in different forms. But so, what inspired you to work with the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless? And do you have any experiences or stories that kind of from the organization or your personal life that kind of shaped a large part of who you are today?
So I fell back into working into the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless kind of by accident. So I went to grad school for community organizing, which for anybody who's interested in a future career in community organizing, I would not suggest that being your first step into this space, into this field. Get connected to an organization, volunteer, look for a internship, and really get to know folks in the community and on the street. But that was my entryway into it. And my very limited understanding of what community organizing is you build a critical mass of people that creates a movement that results in progressive policy. Real basic, very, very limited. And so my thinking was, if the end result is a progressive policy result, then I want to know how folks in the policy world think, the language they use, where there might be opportunities for community leaders to be able to step into spaces, learn skills, and really own and craft those initiatives and those movements. And so when I was in grad school, I actually looked for a public policy internship the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless was looking to fill one. And I actually interned there as a public policy intern for 1 year. And when I was there, I had an amazing time. I did some really fantastic research that was really pivotal for a citywide campaign called Sweet Home Chicago that was all about taking funds from tax increment financing districts and putting them back into affordable housing, to build affordable housing in the city of Chicago. Had a blast doing it, but during the internship, I really found myself gravitating towards the leaders of the campaigns, trying to ask them questions about who they were, what was their experience with working on the campaign, what did they want to see out of the campaign, what was their story. And I just found myself more and more gravitating towards that space. Our director of organizing at the time saw me doing that. I asked him a ton of questions. He invited me to our at the time 1-day community organizing training, and it was like somebody in my brain turned on all the light switches at once and said, like, this is definitively what I should be doing. And so I then took on another internship at the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless through the Midwest Academy, which is a great Chicago-based, but they do placements all over the country to really learn about community organizing, and did a paid internship there. At this time, it was 2009, so the Great Recession was happening. The coalition said, hey, we really like the work you do, but we don't have the money to bring you on full time. And I kind of bounced around looking for jobs. And then in late 2009, some money came through. They reached out to me to work on minimum wage jobs and living wage jobs. And I've been at it ever since. In terms of a story that really, I think, crystallizes for me why I do this work, is not a story that that I've had at CCH, but it's a story that I had back when I was a Jesuit volunteer through the Jesuit Volunteer Corps in Cleveland, Ohio. Is I worked also as a case manager and also an after school mentor for a homeless shelter. It was called a transitional shelter, and at the time it was called New Life Community. And it was really, for me, the first time I had done a lot of volunteering at PADS, which is an acronym for Public Action to Deliver Service or Shelter, depending on the organization. And, you know, my family was one where we helped to make meals. We helped to check in folks who were looking for shelter that stayed in a big open room underneath my church that I was going to at the time in Downers Grove. So I'd had experiences in a shelter volunteering, but working as a Jesuit volunteer in Cleveland, Ohio was really my first time getting to really understand how homelessness can impact adults, kids, and then family units together. And for me, the stories that always stick out is the ones in the interactions I had with kids. I can still to this day remember when, so I was an intern, so I had basically a card table in the file room, which was next to the place where some assessments were done. And I can remember families coming in to do an assessment and the case manager trying to ask this little girl some real basic questions, just about who she was, what was her name, how was she doing, how was she feeling, and she was giving no responses. It was like all the lights were on, but nobody was at home. It was a clear sign of somebody who's dealing with some trauma. And once she got into the program and once she started getting some stability, going to schools, developing some new friends, like, she became this incredibly charismatic, this outspoken, this incredibly confident little girl. And for me, it was really that moment where you could see how programs that are all over the state, all over the country, that are designed to help give some folks some stability, some assistance, some just basic things like a warm, safe place to put your head down at night for you and your kids, can really transform and change somebody in a short matter of time. I mean, what I was talking about with this little girl happened in 2 weeks. And I saw her mom just work her tail off to be able to get a job that not only could pay the bills, but help to get her an affordable housing unit in Cleveland, which was not cheap at the time. And I'm sure today it's gotten even more expensive. But it's stories like that with the kids in that after school daycare program that really stick with me, that remind me why I get up to do this every single day, and what's on the line if you don't.
Yeah, absolutely. I know a lot of the people that we've talked to as well, they kind of say, just go out there, intern, volunteer, and you get these kind of experiences that impact you for a lifetime. So really glad you had that moment as well. So kind of shifting gears a little bit, we want to talk about our current pandemic and how it's affected the coalition, and if you see an increased people needing help or people struggling because of the pandemic.
Absolutely. What we've seen is actually an amazing coordinated effort from providers to try and do the right thing for the households that they're serving. And that means getting them to a safe, healthy living situation. So many of the shelters and providers across the state, in a very, very short amount of time, moved everybody who was in emergency shelter or congregate housing, where you may have seen folks staying on cots in a large open room, shifting them to hotel rooms, where each person, each family ideally will try and get a room to themselves. Sometimes, due to limited resources, some folks have to live doubled up, but really trying to make sure that that does not happen as much as humanly possible. And now, as the pandemic continues to go on, thinking about ways to help either keep those folks sustained in living in hotels, or if folks do need services back at shelters, because some are trying to transition back to shelters on a limited scale, how do you do that in a way that is both healthy and sustainable, not only for the guests who are coming for services, but also for the staff who are tirelessly going every single day to try and provide case management, services, referrals, to try and help get these households to a place of stability and to comfort. And it's not easy. Additionally, with that, if folks are not able to, let me back up. With the pandemic and with a limited amount of resources, a lot of shelters have had to be able to just provide services to the folks that they had at the time when the pandemic exploded. And that's not because they don't want to bring on more folks. It's because the current amount of resources and capacity that they have can only go so far. And there are only sometimes so many hotel rooms in a community that you're just not equipped as a community to bring on more and more folks to be able to provide that housing, that shelter, that resources. And so you see a lot of services and resources that were in like a dedicated housing space sometimes get shifted to a day shelter, but you also want to limit the chances for exposure and passing on COVID. And so sometimes you have like a time gated window. You can only take certain kinds of appointments by phone or email. And for a population that may not have a phone or access to email, that gets really tough. I guess this is a long way to say, in the homeless and housing insecurity space, a lot is really still uncertain and unknown, especially as cases continue to rise. But providers and staff members and the guests themselves are really trying to come together and figure this out together the best that they can. How this has impacted the work that we do at the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless. So back in March, we suspended all outreach. So a lot of our community organizers will go out and try to have one-on-one conversations with folks staying in the shelter to understand their experience, to talk about community organizing. What do they see as issues, challenges, barriers that contribute towards people experiencing homelessness, people preventing people from getting out of homelessness. And we've had to adapt and shift and try to do those conversations through phone or through Zoom if that's available. But getting on a phone call or getting on a Zoom call in the middle of a pandemic is not a high priority for households experiencing homelessness, nor should it be. Really trying to get to that place of stability, making sure that you and your household are safe, healthy, should be that number one priority. But we've seen it have a big impact in our outreach. But even with those challenges, we've still been able to connect to a large number of active existing leaders who are still designing to this day new campaigns, new initiatives, being in spaces with public officials to be able to talk about what does the community that is experiencing homelessness truly need, and helping still shape those policies, those initiatives, and have a big impact on those conversations.
Yeah, especially now, I think it is imperative that people get the help they need, and like you do need to be listening to the stories of people to kind of get a unique perspective, because it's kind of different now than it has been in past years. So it is definitely necessary. So thank you very much for the work that you're doing. So we know that CCH does a lot for advocating certain policies, and one of these has been the fair tax. Can you talk a little bit about what the fair tax is for people who don't know and what the benefits of this legislation is?
I'd be happy to. So right now in Illinois, we have what's called a flat tax rate. It's actually written into our state's constitution that we will have a flat tax rate. And so what that means is if you are a minimum wage worker, a teacher, a nurse, a millionaire or billionaire, we're all paying the same rate, which is 4.95%. And on the surface, that sounds great. But when you actually dig into the details, you see that the bottom 60% of income earners in Illinois bear all of the burden, all of the financial burden when it comes to paying income taxes. And so even though on paper it looks like 4.95%, when you look at the impact to somebody's annual income, and in those moments where they have to decide, what kind of groceries do I get? Do I pay rent? How do I pay for this medication myself or someone in my household needs? How do I pay gas to get to my job if I'm somebody who is still working in an office or in a place or part of the gig economy right now, to try and make ends meet? That 4.95% that goes out is the difference between somebody being able to adequately and accurately make those decisions. Whereas the folks who are millionaires and billionaires, 4.95% is nothing. It's very, they do not feel that financial burden at all. And we think that that's wrong and that's unfair in Illinois. And we want to change that so that our income tax rate structure mirrors that of the federal government. So the more you make, the more you pay, and the less you make, the less you pay. So what we're looking at right now is if you make over $250,000, you would see your income taxes go up. And if you make $250,000 or less, your income taxes would either stay the same or begin to go down. And right now, especially as there's been so much unemployment and folks are trying to find new jobs in this space, that decrease in taxes could be the difference between somebody making rent, somebody being able to buy groceries for their household, somebody being able to get that necessary medication. This is also good news for businesses as well, because after payroll and work expenses are considered, on the profit, not the revenue you make, but the profit, if it's over $250,000, it starts to go up. If it's $250,000 or less, it stays the same or begins to go down. So this is good for business owners as well, because if you have a rough year, like a lot of businesses are having, this could be an opportunity actually for your income taxes to go down so you can save some money to either put it back in your business or to help pay your household's expenses as well.
Absolutely, yeah. So kind of just wanted to pick your brain a little bit at this, but we know here in Naperville, like the median salary is a little bit higher than I guess most communities in America. And from people I've talked to, their concerns are one that it would motivate people to leave the state to, you know, places that maybe don't have a state tax, as well as it's not benefiting the upper middle class at all. So what would your response to an argument like this be?
First of all, there's no research that talks about that would happen in any significant way. The second, I would say, look at our Midwest neighbors. Minnesota has one of the most progressive fair tax income tax rate structures, and their economy has been soaring. It's doing really, really well. Look at our neighbors to the north in Wisconsin. What they have proposed and implemented, which is a fair tax rate system, is more than we are proposing at Illinois' rate, and they're doing really well. They also have progressive income tax rates structures in Iowa as well. So I guess what I want to say is if that even happened, where would they go to not be having to grapple with and deal with a fair tax rate structure? Illinois is one of 8 states in the country that has a flat tax rate structure, and it is actually one of the most regressive tax rates structures in the entire United States. If folks want to see more of those details, you can go to voteyesforfairtax.com, and you can actually read all of those details yourself.
Awesome.
Thank you. And so so kind of shifting gears once again, how does the coalition ensure that individuals experiencing homelessness are able to build and create long-term success and sustainability for the future? And so, like, what programs do you guys help to implement?
Do you mind repeating the question?
Yeah, sure. How does the coalition help ensure that individuals experiencing homelessness are able to eventually create long-term success and sustainability for the future?
So one of the things that I really like about our organization is we're leader driven, is that what we want to propose, and when I say we collectively as the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless, what we want to see happen in our communities starts with the leaders who are impacted by these issues. And so we don't want to be an organization that just does research and then makes a bunch of policy suggestions, because we've seen when that happens, when those policies then get implemented in our communities, a whole new set of challenges and barriers come up. And a lot of times those solutions don't actually make significant or meaningful impact to the folks who are impacted by these community issues. And so we try to create spaces where we get to know folks who are impacted by the issues, creating spaces where folks can talk either individually or collectively together. And then we craft and build a plan together based on research and solutions that come from the community. So in as many ways as we can, we really try to create ownership for community leaders, people with lived experience, to be able to have all the keys possible towards decision making, structures, the solution that's proposed at the end, or the solution that's proposed to address the community issue. As many keys as possible to making those decisions and creating that impact in the community that they would like to see happen. I'll also be the first to say that we are learning and growing and trying to get even better at doing that, that we had a formula, we had an approach that we thought was working, have recently done an internal evaluation and saw that it wasn't going as deep as we were hoping. We weren't creating as much changes we were hoping for, and are now trying to learn and grow, adapt, and evolve to even create more and better opportunities to do that.
Awesome. Okay, yeah. So kind of taking a more like present day, issues kind of stance on things. Do you believe that there is an intersectionality between race and homelessness in the United States? And how do you think that we as a society can better recognize that intersection and work to address those issues?
Absolutely. That people in communities of color are more significantly impacted by homelessness than their white household counterparts. There are so many studies and reports out there that say and reiterate that. I believe a recent report that either we have published or we've used internally talks about in Chicago, 50% of the people who experience homelessness are Black. And then it goes down the line in terms of Latinx communities, Asian immigrant communities, and then impacting European and white communities. And so, yes, homelessness is very significantly felt towards Black and brown communities, and it is a byproduct of a systemic and oppressive racist system that is forcing Black and brown communities into low-paying jobs. It is propelled by racist housing policies that we've had in our country for a very long time. And in fact, something that is a concern that we are seeing, especially as the Trump administration and HUD are trying to roll back some of the fair housing policies that have been in place to try and provide more equal opportunities and roll back these horrible racist and oppressive policies that are somehow or are sometimes built into the fabric of our communities themselves. And so, yes, for us, absolutely, we see that race is intricately linked with homelessness and housing insecurity, which is why we are trying to build racial equity lenses to be able to examine the work that we do, how we're creating spaces, how we're reaching out to folks, the solutions that are being proposed. Because at the end of the day, we don't want solutions that just continue to benefit and provide privilege for white households. We want to make sure that we are doing as much as we can to both name and begin the process of dismantling some of these horrible systemic racist and oppressive policies.
Yeah, I do think that it's very apparent that these are systemic inequalities that exist within our system, either as a byproduct of our history, which has been historically oppressive and discriminatory, or as a result of modern day policies that continue to disproportionately affect Black and Brown communities. And so kind of recognizing that intersection helps us ensure that we are addressing the situation in the manner that is necessary. So yeah, that is incredible. And so kind of going at like a broader aspect, do you think that homelessness as a whole will ever be abolished in the United States? And what do you think needs to happen, either through legislation or through like cultural change before we can get to that point?
It's a great question. And I think my answer might surprise you is no, that a portion of folks who experience homelessness or housing insecurity are due to natural causes. So, we just had tornadoes and windstorms that ripped through a lot of our communities here in Illinois. Houses were damaged. There's households right now. I've been talking to my coworkers in Chicago that are still on their fourth day without power, and there's no real answer on when that electricity is going to come back, which means food that they've had refrigerated is starting to go bad or has gone bad. They can't work or be as productive as that they were hoping for. And also with rising temperatures, they're not able to cool off in the ways that they were hoping to be able to do. And so, no, I think we will always have folks who are experiencing homelessness due to things like tornadoes and hurricanes, fires, somehow natural causes that lead to the loss of homes. Another portion of folks who experience homelessness are displaced workers. And so when a company that has set up shop for years and years in a community either decides to get up and move to another community or another state, those workers are displaced, and that's a huge loss of income. Hopefully they've been able to build up some savings, but even if that's the case, in a lot of those examples, those folks are going to burn through those savings and find themselves in some real sticky financial situations, and may need to rely on homelessness and housing programs. The good news is there is also a way to be able to move some of the folks who are experiencing homelessness on a more chronic level, which means that they've had an episode of homelessness at least 3 times in any given year. We can start addressing and impacting that today. And a lot of that starts with, and even for the folks who have lost houses due to natural causes, a lot of that can be solved by increasing the amount of affordable housing stock in our communities. So if someone has a sudden loss in income, but is able to tap into a rental assistance program, having a home that is priced not only so that it caters towards those with job security, those with wealth, but those on a multitude of income levels, the goal would be to be able to position them into an affordable housing unit. And then once they get on their feet, they can look towards something else. But that only happens if we create the policies on local, state, and federal levels to drastically increase the amount of affordable housing. It's the number one thing when you talk to people experiencing homelessness, the providers, the folks on the front lines providing direct services every single day. It is the number one thing in Zion, Illinois, which is the top northeast corner of Illinois, down to East St. Louis. Everybody says if we can increase the stock of affordable housing, we can make a huge, significant impact in how people experience homelessness and housing insecurity.
Yeah, I think when the people that are detached from these issues talk about homelessness, they talk about like a lot about like the individual and the individual not being able to get a job because it's really hard to kind of rise out of homelessness. But like on a larger systemic level, there just isn't enough like housing or available real estate for people to affordably live in a home and come out of homelessness that way. So I think that is definitely a piece of information that people in our community will find valuable.
Yeah.
And so, kind of wrapping things up. So, for all the people who are listening or reading, we just want to find out: are there any opportunities for people to help the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless, or the efforts that the organization is pursuing?
Absolutely. If folks are currently living in or do a lot of activity in Naperville or DuPage County, we'd love to have you come and either observe or participate in our monthly DuPage Housing Alliance meetings. This is a wonderful space where you'll see firsthand the leaders in the community coming together to do the research, do the planning, do the strategizing, coming up with the solutions that are trying to increase affordable housing in Naperville today. We're actually we're in the process of a campaign to bring an inclusionary zoning ordinance to Naperville so that whenever there's any new housing development, like for instance, in the Citygate development where Top Golf is at over on 59, basically 59 and 88, if that development were to go through, we want to see a percentage of those units that are developed to be affordable. And that means that households who are it means that households who are working minimum wage jobs or even middle class jobs have a chance to get to be able to live in Naperville. That there have been so many reports recently. There's been a consultant that the city of Naperville has used, SB Friedman, that just issued this huge report that said that many of the folks who do business that work jobs in Naperville can't afford to live there. And so they live in the surrounding communities and have to commute to their jobs, which means that's time away from their family. That's money that they've worked hard for that they now have to put into continual gas and car maintenance, which takes away from rent and groceries and vital medication. We want to see developments when things like this happen, have that be a portion goes set aside for affordable housing so that they can live in the city that they work in. So that's one area. The other piece that we were talking about with fair tax is if you are going to be 18 on November 3rd, we have a link for an online pledge card that you can sign. If fair tax is something that sounds good to you, especially if you are going to be looking for a job or working for a job post-college, post-graduate school, even a job while you're in high school, you're paying taxes on that money that you're earning. And so this is a chance for those taxes to go down so that you have more money in your pocket for your home, your household, for yourself, especially if you are one of the primary income earners for your household. So sign a pledge card. We're also doing bi-weekly days of action. So every other Wednesday, we're trying to come up with ideas to spread the word and try and find more people that are willing to sign a pledge card and vote for fair tax on November 3rd. So if that's something that you're interested in, we're looking at trying to do a couple of different things. There was this really great successful action. I'm forgetting the state. I believe it was Minnesota again, where they hired a DJ. They found kind of a B-list celebrity to be able to host a Zoom meeting. And they just said, like, how many people can we get into the Zoom space to listen to some cool music, to hang out together, considering the pandemic, and also do a little bit of talking about the need to register to vote. And they were able to register 10,000 people to vote that night. So we're looking at trying to do similar kinds of fun activities, house parties. We'd love to set up something where we actually break Zoom for a day, where we have so many people in there that are interested in talking, hanging out, talking about fair tax. And how one of the things I forgot actually when we were talking about fair tax is if we put this into place, we can actually raise an additional $3.4 billion in new funds. So this isn't even what we're bringing in now, but on top of what we're bringing in to be able to be invested in our communities for housing, for public schools, for healthcare, for safety. There's a number of things that this money can go for. We want to be able to create spaces to talk to folks, especially young folks, because so often they are left out of the conversation. And we want to change that. We want to create spaces where we want to hear your ideas, your thoughts, and see if you're interested in voting for this or talking to somebody who can.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll definitely spread the word in that sense and see if we can get people involved with the organization.
Awesome.
All right, thank you so much for coming and taking time out of your day to have this conversation with us. It's incredibly important to the dialogue that we're trying to help promote. So thank you again.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure. And thank you for the privilege to be able to talk to the both of you, for your audience, for your membership. This is the way we change this stuff, right? This is the way we start to dismantle systemic racism and oppression, is by having conversations like this, by not being afraid to talk about things like how homelessness and housing insecurity are so intertwined and intimately connected to things like race. It's time to stop hiding our heads in the sand and trying to pretend like this doesn't happen, especially in wealthy, well-known communities like Naperville. So thank you so much for the privilege and the opportunity to talk to the both of you and your viewing audience.
Thank you very much. Have a good rest of your day.
You too.